welcome back. Uh, I just reinstalled Windows, and with that, I reinstalled everything, including SolidWorks. And normally, when I do that, I back up all my settings and templates, and then I import them again, and it's a nice and easy process. This time, I forgot to back up everything, and my last backup is very old. And on top of that, I want to do a video showing how I got to that point in the first place. So I'm just gonna get to that point in the first place. This is a clean SolidWorks install. It's 2019, and I just started it for the first time, other than going through all the registration and stuff. First thing I'm gonna do is you get this welcome screen. Some people like it, I don't. I'm gonna click that and close. Then I got this little arrow up here. If I hover over it, it expands. I click the little pin. That way it stays there. And I'm just going to click here to make the side panel go away. And then I'm going to click New. And I get this. I want to work in millimeter gram second personally. Choice is up to you, obviously. And then the dimensioning standard, I personally prefer ANSI, because that's kind of what I'm used to. But of course, if you're somewhere where one of these other ones is more common, feel free. And click OK. And it's going to make a new part for me. Well, now I can. I'm just double click the part. And alright, I'm going to go to Features. Under Reference Geometry, I want a coordinate system. And not going to mess with anything, just click OK. So on this coordinate system, you see I've got a Z, X, and a Y. So if I click this plane, see the Z is coming off of that. So I'm going to rename it Z0. Click this plane, the Y is coming off of it, Y0. So that just leaves X0. And I've got my origin, which I want to hide. I've got my coordinate system, which I want to hide. And let's see, if I click up here and go to document properties, I've got all sorts of options as well. So if I wanted to have a different default font, which I actually like that as a default font, and it comes in as 3.175, which is to the standards. I like that. I've got no problem with that really, but I could change it if I wanted to. And I could change pretty much any of the geometric tolerancing type things in there. They're all fine as far as I'm concerned, especially since I really don't use them that often, at least not on my personal computer. For dimensions, I like 3-digit for primary and dual, and that's about all I mess with in here. But you've got lots of options, especially if you're going with inches. You need to mess with the leading zeros sometimes and the trailing zeros as well, but it all is correct for metric right out of the box. So angles, I'm going to also go to 3. Angular running, go to 3. Arc length, already to 3, good. Just double check that all these are to 3. Yes, they're all fine. Virtual sharps is what I want, but you may want something a little bit different. Unless you're working for a company that's got a standard, it's just what looks best to you, what's easiest for you to work with, and this is personally what I'm used to. Tables, I usually don't even use tables on my personal system, but you can do all that configuration. The thing is that we're configuring all this stuff now because we're going to save this all into a template, so you won't have to change this every time in the future. You just change it once. So just go through and make sure everything is the way I want it. You can turn on grids by default. I don't recommend that, but you can. And I'm just going to go to 3 on in here. And that works for me. Basically, all these defaults are just kind of what I've been used to from working with it, so I basically know what it looks like anyway, so that works well for me. So just went through the document properties real quick. So now I've got nothing in here really, but I want to save. And I'm going to do a save as, and I can make it a part template, and it'll automatically select where I want to be. I'm just going to overwrite the default one, and yes, I want to replace it. Then I'm going to do new assembly. And again, I'm going to insert my coordinate system. And in the assembly, it's not showing because I've got it turned off, but I can turn it on like that. And Z0, Y0, X0. Then hide and hide. And up to here, document properties, annotations, actually dimensions that is. Basically make the same changes we made before. And let's see. Just repeating the same changes, so I'm trying to remember exactly all what I did. And these are, personal preferences unless you've got a company standard that you're working to. So yeah. Okay. I'm gonna save this as well. I'm gonna save it at this time as an assembly template. Overwrite the default one. Yes. Alright, so now I've got my part and I've got my assembly, at least drawing. And lots of options in here. Let's see, we've got now here's where it can get a little bit time consuming is if you've got a printer that's capable of doing all these sizes, and sometimes you do an A and sometimes you do an E, you're gonna have to do all these. Personally, I almost never print anything out. I do model-based definition if I need to. Generally, since I work one-man shop, I'll usually won't even make drawings. I'll do it and I'll just export to a DXF directly from the part. But yeah, when I was working in the industry, often I'd have to, this would be for like an entire product. This would be for a sub-product. This would be for like a single piece. And then very rarely would I use A or B. But I am actually going to make let's start with an E. So I'm going to make a custom template for myself. So I want to right click and do edit sheet format. I'm just going to select everything and delete it and right click out or click here to get out of that. And let's see, right click here, click properties, and I don't want zones, so I'm going to have 1 and 1, and I'm going to have 0 and 0 and 0 and 0, apply changes, and let's see, yeah, here. going to do a custom sheet size because this is going to be 700 by 500 because that's the size of my laser cutter's bed. And I'm actually going to add an extra 20 to each just so that I'm not right up against the edge when I'm designing stuff. Apply changes. Yes, I want to delete those. And I'm going to save sheet format as laser cutter bed. So now I've got a custom sheet format that works for me. Actually, I've got all these properties. 1 and 1. Apply. Alright. File, save sheet format. Laser cutter bed, save, yes. And I'm going to save as well as a drawing template. Yep. Alright. So I've got all my basics done. Just going to make a new part. So now see how always in my videos you see when I start a new part it's like that. That's how I get it that way. And the assembly is the same way, and then I've got a custom drawing template that if I start new drawing, it automatically selected it because I've got it set to that, but you can also set it to not do that. So next thing I need to do, we can go to options in general. So I was working over here. We can also work on this side, and there's a lot of settings that are useful to modify, so I'm just going to go through and point out some of the ones that are noticeable. Here's one that a lot of times if you're doing diagnostics or fixing other people's things, you're going to want to change this to continue because you're going to have just so many times that you've just got a rebuild error, and maybe you're walked away from your desk or whatever and you don't want it to stop then. I don't want this. I don't want the internet stuff that's going to have to connect to the internet because sometimes this laptop's offline. I don't want sounds. Yeah, I've got no sounds set up already, but I don't want sounds. And I want to make sure that's unchecked as well. Doesn't really matter. This one can screw you up, so I like to turn that off. It'll resize things right after you dimension them, and it can be handy, but more often than not, it just messes things up. Let's see, we don't want that. Select hidden entities. These can be useful, but you can always just draw endpoints there anyway. Let's see, display style. By default, I'm going to want it hidden lines removed, but sometimes you want hidden lines visible depending on what you're doing. It can give you a little bit more detail, but if you've got something that's got too much detail, then it gets confusing, and I tend to have too much detail rather than not enough. I am going to turn this to high quality and make sure this is set to visible. Don't really care about the hatch. It's fine as it is. This can be a trouble. It's handy if you've got small drawings. It's a nightmare if you've got big drawings. So I'm going to turn it off. And I'm also going to turn off that. Yeah, I know that. That's why I'm turning it off. And Yeah, I can leave that as it is. Colors are all fine by default as far as I'm concerned, but some people change them just because certain colors they have trouble with, especially if they're colorblind uh, or partially colorblind. Uh, so this sometimes I've seen this turned on, and it's a nightmare to work with. But the people who have it on seem to appreciate it. Um, Actually, I think I've had that on a couple times when I was doing videos, and I was working with it because I was having other problems with the system at the time, so I didn't really care. Let's see. And I'm going to disable this because sometimes that can make a horrible mess that you don't even know about. Uh, okay, so relations and snaps. This is kind of important. Maybe I should put this in the sketch video actually. Um, so I do keep some snaps on, but if you have all these snaps on, you're just going to have a nightmare. Um, so endpoints and sketch points, those are fine. Center points I turn off. If I need to snap to a center point, I can just put a point there. But generally, I don't want to do that. Midpoints, same thing. Or sorry, center points I want on. That's like the center of a circle. Midpoints are like the midpoint on a line. I want that off. As are quadrants and intersections, and nearest is handy. Tangent causes all sorts of nightmares. Perpendicular causes problems. Parallel, horizontal and vertical, and length as well. Grid is off by default. It causes so much problems. And angle off as well. So out of all those, which like one was turned off, now I've got all but three turned off. And even then, I sometimes have to undo a mate that I didn't intend to do. Let's see. This is actually kind of neat when you're working inside of a part that's inside of assembly. The rest of the assembly can be made to be kind of invisible, and it's just makes it a little bit easier to work on that particular part without having to hide other things. And I'm going to drop that down just a little bit, make the rest of it a little bit more invisible. It's still visible. It's like it's made out of glass or something. Uh, Now this is something that someone asked in another video. Uh, when I'm selecting something, uh, I drag and you'll see it's not a square box by default. That's what you get. I like it as a lasso, so I can like get up and underneath and in between things. And let's see. I'm gonna disable that. That this comes in handy for the sheet metal because sometimes when I design something, it is self-intersecting because that's how it's kind of got to be designed. It won't obviously be self-intersecting in the real world, but it'll be bent a little bit past where normal is. That way, it's like pressing tight against itself. Let's see. We don't want that. We don't want that. Uh, these are all pretty good defaults. They used to be pretty bad, but over the years they've gotten better. I want this all the way off. I want this one step up away from off. And I want this to be all the way to the right. And that's all good. I can move by dragging. I want that. Some people want to turn this off though, so they don't accidentally drag something. But generally I've got everything pretty well constrained, so I can't drag it anyway, unless it's something that I'm in the process of moving, in which case I want to drag it. Let's see. This is something that's kind of based on your system. Uh, so if you've got a lesser system, you want a lower number. If you've got a more capable system, you want a higher number. And this is again, if you're if this would be like if you're designing an entire engine and transmission and the whole drive line for a vehicle, for example. This would be if you're designing the entire vehicle, every last screw and nut and everything, which I don't really deal with that often, but nonetheless, I'm going to have it available if I've got more than 5,000 components. Uh, and you can control what it does when it's in that mode as well. All right. And external. Those are all actually pretty good. So default templates. I could change these. I could have saved those templates as new names and changed these, but I just saved them over the originals, so those are still fine. File locations. Haven't really added anything, so I don't need to add anything in there. So feature manager. This is actually handy. So over here, mainly, you can see things like sensors, annotations, and stuff like that. So, like right now, I don't have any sensors, and I hardly ever have any sensors, so I'm going to set that to automatic. Blocks, same deal. Annotations, I'm going to keep those on. Solid bodies, I'm going to set to show, surface to show, because I work with those a lot with multiple body parts. Let's see. E-drawing, automatic. You can, depending on how often you use this stuff, you can change how you want it to be set up. I work with equations a lot, so I want that shown. Work with material frequently. I want the default planes shown. I want my origin shown. If I'm in an assembly, my mate references, well, if I've got them, they'll be shown, which as soon as I made something, I'll have them. Let's see, history, set to, actually I'm going to hide that because I can generally remember what I just did. And this one I'm going to set to automatic just because I don't often have graphic bodies. So this is kind of hard to explain. I never really use it, so I don't really have a good explanation for it. Sorry. This is for when you rotate with the keyboard mainly, and I'm pretty good with everything that as it is. I'd like to stretch this out a little bit because sometimes I'm working with big parts that take over 10 minutes to save, and that causes all sorts of nightmares. And I can set this to now I've got a custom folder there. I want to back up as well, so I'm going to do like a 5 deep backup in the same place. And say 45 minutes, 10 seconds. All right. I don't have a touch screen. Whole wizard, I've already configured that when I was doing the install. File Explorer, so don't really use my documents, but the rest works. 3D Content Central results. Don't want to index, definitely. Well, I can't turn off indexing, but I don't want it to do well while I'm working. Don't need a multi-user environment. And I do want this, although, like I said, if you're rebuilding, fixing someone else's problems, you might want to turn that off. I do want a warning. It still lets me save if it has errors, but it at least gives me a warning. And this is actually kind of handy because a lot of times you start a sketch thinking that you're in a part, but you're in assembly. So that comes in very handy. And circular references are bad. We want to know about them anytime they happen. Potential ones, not so bad because they're not necessarily actual errors. And let's see. Then for import, we've got a lot of things. 3D interconnect is actually pretty handy. Import diagnostics, I like to turn off because it really slows things down on big imports, and I can always run it manually. This doesn't do too much damage as far as performance, so I can leave that on. And let's see, we have all sorts of settings in there. So I want to, whenever it can, import it as a solid body in millimeters for like mesh type deals. VRML, I've never get those really, but I want a solid body. And solid bodies, surface bodies, I don't care about the planes on those. I don't care about materials or any other properties. So just, if I'm importing something from one of these, I just want it as a dumb solid. And same deal here. If I'm getting one of these, it's basically just a dumb solid. Here's interesting things. Steps and IGES files sometimes have many different separate parts in them, and you can import them as a multi-body part, or you can insert it as or this would be like a multi-body part, like what most of my laser cutter things are designed as. This will be an assembly with each individual body being a part. And so that's good. In export, we only have to worry about the ones that we actually use. So step, I'm going to try to do it as solid and surface geometry when I export it. And that's fine. I don't use most of these. STL, this is mainly used for 3D printing, and the default settings are not good. Basically, I just drag these all the way over to get the maximum quality. And if it's too much for the slicer, or if it's too high of a quality for the 3D printer to actually do, that doesn't really hurt you. I mean, it might make a file that's a couple hundred megabytes, but I mean, we live in an age where you can get memory the size of your pinky fingernail that has 128 gigs, so who really cares? And yeah, the last one is, I use this once in a while. Don't want to remove anything, even the mask properties. I want to remove that though. And so, okay. Yeah, that must have been an extra one. All right, so basic settings are set. Now, my big problem is these bars up here. They are laid out pretty poorly, in my opinion. I realize they're relatively easy for new users, and by setting up like this, you can use it on a really crummy old display. But I've got a 1080p screen, and I consider that to be kind of a crummy old display. So I'm not going to be using a 720p or anything like that. And basically, at this point, we can just drag things that we want. So like I'm working in features here, so I've already got that there, but if I didn't, I could just drag it or have a second copy, and then I can also remove it. And then if I right click on these, I can say I don't want text below. It goes like that, and then you can stack them 3 high, and it takes less space than like this. I can also say, you know what, I know what that icon is. I don't use it that often, but I know what it is, so I can find it if I need it, and I can just go like that. Another thing I can do is I can right click and say I want to begin a group, and it puts a little divider there, so like that. And then we can always revert back, say text below. So at this point, I'm going to spend quite a while doing those, and I don't really feel like talking through the whole process because this will be, you know, what works for you. You'll put there. But I will show. I am going to stop the video, but I'll bring it back once I'm all done and show you what the final results are in case you, for some reason, want to copy. All right, got everything pretty much set up. Uh, Mostly the same as what I had before. I made a couple of minor changes. So if you're wanting to make any of those, let me see. You can read all that. I'll just hover over the things that I've hidden the text for so that you can match up with them if you want to match with this. And I know I put some things in non-standard spots, but that's just where they're most convenient for me. And again, when you're doing this, if you want to use a search in the top right there, you can search for it. When you find it, you can just drag it into place in the bar here. So I'll just go over all these that are without text. And if you need to, you can pause. And I think that's everything. All right, a couple of the little things to deal with. First, let's see. Let's see if I can find my add-ins. I've got most of the add-ins right there, but I've see if I can find them in here. Yeah, just search in there. So by default, a lot of these add-ins are set to start with SolidWorks, and as you can see here, like this one adds 3 seconds, this one adds 5 seconds. If I'm restarting it frequently and I'm not using them, I uncheck them. So I basically just remove them all from startup. I can always start them later, so just uncheck the startup, click OK. Let's see. Only other thing that I want to change is something that I should have changed earlier. So I'm going to make a new part. It's going to load from that template I made. And I'm going to go to Apply Scene. And I want plain white. And then I'm going to save as a part template. And save, yep. And I'm going to make a new assembly, do the same thing. Because I don't, a lot of times I'm taking screenshots and I don't want this this hue behind there. I want it to be just plain white. So that's the only other really common thing that I do. Alright, so at that, SolidWorks is pretty much set up. I've got to kind of go through the same process of setting up the command bar for assemblies, and then again for drawings, which when it comes time to actually use those in one of these videos, I'll probably try to integrate that. But this at least gets you up to speed with with how SolidWorks was set up while I was doing my previous videos and probably most of my future videos, since I do a lot of stuff for laser cutting, which it's wood, it's interconnected and interrelated, and uh, Assemblies and SolidWorks just really don't like it when you've got like a bunch of different parts referencing each other and driving each other, and feature one in part one drives feature two in part two, and then feature two in part two drives feature three back in part one again. It's not a fan of that at all. Whereas you can get away with it if you just use multiple bodies. So yeah, I usually end up working almost entirely in parts just because I use a lot of wood. But at some point, I'll definitely probably be designing something more mechanical that I can make good use of the assembly with. So that's all I've got for now. Uh, Comment if you like or don't or dislike. It's up to you. You know how YouTube works. See you next time.